Good morning, everyone. Today, let us discuss the important aspects, the critical aspects that relate to the poem Kubla Khan. And since we've already discussed the poem as well as the sources and the introduction. Now, the last topic, as far as Kubla Khan is concerned, the various aspects which relates to the critical understanding of the poem. So, the first thing is that Kubla Khan is considered as a great poem of the three best poems that are written by Kubla Khan. I have already told you the other two, Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, which is in your course, and the second one is Christabel. This I have shared in the first tutorial also. Okay, so it is one of the three best poems, three great poems, I must say, that are written by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Coleridge is, not very great a poet, but these are his significant achievements. Now, this is the shortest one of the three poems that he has written, and it is one of the remarkable of the three. It differs from the other two that it does not relate a story. In the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner ko hum, we call it a narrative poem because the story is being narrated. But this particular poem is a piece of description. We are being described. In the first part, it describes the mighty river and the pleasure dome that was ordered by the conqueror Kubla Khan to be constructed, right? And the later part describes us what? It describes us the power of poetry, which I told you in the previous tutorial. Power of poetry and inspiration, as well as a poet in frenzy of creation. That how a poet creates a poem, okay? So this is the greatness of the poem. Next is Coleridge's account. He has himself given, when I'm saying poet's account is, he has given an account of the origin and the sources of the poem, which I've already discussed with you. Coleridge himself says that the poem is a fragment. According to him, it is only a part of the poem of 2 to 300 lines which came to him in his dream. Not only did he actually see the picture that he paints in the poem, even the lines and the words came to him just as they are. But he could not complete the poem as he was interrupted by a visitor and his vision faded. इसीलिए हम इसको बोलते हैं कि it is fragmented also. इसी से आपका ये connect हो जाएगा. Right? Because there is no connection between the first half and the second half. Now, some critics, they regard it as a fragment, whereas some do not. They say that Coleridge is telling us a story that is coming to him and whatever he could write. But some critics regard it as a poem about process of poetic creation, about ecstasy of imaginative fulfillment. So every critic, for that matter, they have different opinions. Different critics have different opinions, but then Coleridge himself is telling us that why it is a fragment, right? So these two portions are somewhat connected to it, because Coleridge is telling us the origin, he's telling us the source, and of course you should know that which book he was reading, Purchas's Pilgrimage. I've been mentioning this time and again in the tutorials. So it is a fragment or not, it always remains a question, because there are so many aspects of the poem. Now, when we talk of coherence, generally people say that there is no connection. First, the poet is talking of the pleasure doom, right? And then in the last half, he's talking of the maid, Abyssinia maid. And then he's talking of what? The power of creation, the power of poetry. But then that is why he says there is no connection, there is no coherence. But when you, at a closer study, the poem is, it do has a coherent meaning. और वो कोहेरेंस कहाँ से आता है? If anybody of you could get the answer before I tell it, the coherence comes from the dream. Now, otherwise there is no coherence, because there are two different aspects that are being discussed in first half and the second half. But when we say that it is a connection between the whole poem runs, there is a connection between the whole of the poem, then we can say of course there is coherence only of a dream. जैसे कि dream में एक coherence होता है. The whole poem follows the course of a dream. Even the description of the elf has a dream-like quality. The pictures are repeated, and it is not easy to follow the course of river exactly. It is also difficult to conclude whether the river had an entire course of 10 miles or whether it was only a part of the course. Again, it is not at all possible to say with confidence how wild and fertile parts of the course of the river are related to each other. So, again, the transition from description of river to the description of vision is abrupt, and the connection between the first part and the second part is somewhat difficult. So, in vividness as well as lack of smooth transition, the poem in itself is like a dream. So, take it both ways. If we say there is a coherent meaning, we deny it. But when we say if the poem is a dream, if the poem is a dream, then of course there is what? There is coherence. Okay? Next is imagination. Now, the poet's imagination is much aroused by the river Alf, the measureless. बहुत सारी चीज़ें हैं देखो, river. Then your caverns are gorgeous. Earth, breathing earth, जिसको हम लिखते हैं panting earth. Then dancing rocks. So many of them you will find here. Right? So, silent ocean, lifeless sea, the tumult of the mighty waves, and the scene where a woman wails for his demon lover, all these excite our imagination. And what happens is we get what kind of a feeling? A feeling of awe, fear, है ना? We get a feeling of mystery, right? And in this way, the poet uses his imagination. In what? He uses his imagination to create his poem as such. Now, next is the description of the damsel. This again, we can say, is an example of creating what? Creating power. This suggests that this damsel, this symbol, this beautiful maiden damsel, she in itself is a symbol of creative power that has been created in poetry by whom? By Coleridge. Okay? The poet glides into his new theme through suggestion, and the two parts are connected by poet's desire to build the pleasure dome with his help of imagination. He then describes the poet when the fit of creation is upon him. तो वो जो explanation था ना, fiery eyes, open hair, long hair and all. So what is that? That is like he is into a fit. You understand fit? A seizure, he gets into that seizure of doing what? A seizure of creating poetry. Next, he gives us a series of picture. Series of picture is again the same over here. The images which the poet has used here. The pictorial quality is there. There are a series of picture. When the king, he announces what? He announces the pleasure dome. What all do you see? Sorry. He describes the river, he describes the caverns, he describes the chasms जो हमने ऊपर नहीं mention किए हैं. He describes to us the what all there, the moon, right? So many things, so many pictures are described by the poet. That is what is done here. So then towards the end there is the description of the poet in frenzy, poet who is disturbed and who is making who is in the process of composing a poem. Okay, then there is vagueness. What do you see? You see a combination of vagueness and vividness. These pictures, all these which we have discussed over here, do they really happen? No. Where do they happen? This combination can only happen in a dream. So please remember this particular aspect. The impressions of a dream have clear outline, and yet they concentrate only a few details. In other words, the description leaves much to the readers. The description is what? It is vagueness. Vague समझते हैं? Vague is something which you don't understand clearly. Vague, which is difficult to understand. Vividness is clarity. That is not much there. Why? Because it is an explanation of what we call a dream. Now, for example, if we have to understand the pleasure dome, it is situated on the bank of River Elf. It has sunny domes, caves of ice, and its shadow is falling into the floating waves. And that it was haunted by tumult of mighty river. So all these things, they are vague, and yet the picture that is presented is very vivid, very clear, but it is difficult to be understood in reality, whereas it can definitely happen in a dream. That is what it means. And from this particular aspect, that is vagueness, arises the mystery. The vagueness is the greatest strength of this description. It leaves so much to suggestion that every reader with little imagination will build a vast scene of his own. The mystery becomes more effective because of this vast vision of vagueness which surrounds the vivid pictures. Right? So from here, from the vagueness comes the vividness and the mystery of the scene. Right? Now, all these things, they can be clubbed into one thing. And what is that? That is supernaturalism. Now, okay, first let's talk of supernaturalism. There are several touches of supernaturalism. Though the details are realistic, but the total impression of the palace, of the maid, and of the poet, the frenziness into which the poet gets into, these are unreal. They do not happen in the real world. And this can also be called the unearthly, something that does not exist on the earth. It only exists in the supernatural world, not in the earthly world. So this is an unearthly world. And supernaturalism is also achieved with the help of the touches that are scattered here and there. And there are so many examples. The king himself, Xanadu, right? Alf, then your Abora, Mount Abora, then your Abyssinia maid, and then the chasms, the wailing demon, so many things, milk of paradise जो कि end में आता है, and all these the caves of the ice, the forecast of the professing of the war, sunless, lifeless ocean, caverns measureless to man, and the beginning, whatever is given in the poem, all those aspects. If I have it here, I will be in a position to show it to you. See, all this romantic chasms, ये आपका एल्फ आ गया, ज़नाडू आ गया, right? So many of them. Your where was the measureless? This is your measureless man, right? Then not request, a savage place. Then ceaseless turmoil, ever ending. Then your not chaffy grain, but yes, professing war. Your caves of ice, your abyssine maid, your Mount Tabora, and your floating hair, flashing eyes, and the honeydew and the milk of paradise. So all these aspects, they relate to what? They relate to your supernatural aspect of the poem. Now, when we talk of Coleridge, please keep in mind that the two most significant aspects which relates to any question that you will get in your paper will obviously, first of all, you should be ready with a critical appreciation of the poem. That is very, very significant. Critical appreciation is somewhat different from summary. Summary नहीं होती है, please उसको ध्यान रखें, है ना. आप you give the summary and side by side you also explain that what is what. Second, you have to deal with the poem as a supernatural poem. And third are your romantic elements. तो ये जो भी मैंने बच्चे अभी डिस्कस किए हैं ना aspects, all these will come under this category of the romantic elements in the poem, right? So please remember this particular thing. And when I talk of Coleridge, then especially Kubla Khan, romantic features of Kubla Khan I told you. Then again, if you get a question on, the question is Kubla Khan, poetic creation. Poetic creation will again pick up all these aspects, or which can also include a question of genius of Coleridge as a poet. So please cover all these points, right? आपके examples बड़े clear होने चाहिए. Whatever you will mention here, whatever you will mention here, the ones which I read in the end, right? And I will be obviously giving you my book so that you can take photocopies and prepare questions, your questions for the purpose of examination. So with this, Kubla Khan, the poem Kubla Khan is over. Next, we move on to the second poem by Coleridge, that is The Rime of the Ancient Mariner.